little bit of halftime analysis. Virginia Tech trails ODU 28-0 at the half. My thoughts, it's over.
And over it is as Virginia Tech fires head coach Brent Pry following a 45-26 loss against ODU in Lane Stadium on Saturday. Had instant reactions right after that. That video was filmed there at halftime in the ODU game when they were down 28-0. And the writing was sort of on the wall. Doesn't sound like it might end there. Have some people with days numbered, but we'll get into a little bit of all of that. Recruiting dysfunction, on-field mess, hot board buzz, talking about some of those other characters, Wit, the clock's ticking on some of those other things, and just getting into some other notable. So appreciate everyone jumping in here today for another edition of Kolby's Corner on Monday, September 15th, here from Blacksburg, Virginia. Jumping straight into things. 3 games into the Brent Pry era, and it's already over. So stepping up, heading into Wofford. News came down Sunday that Philip Montgomery will be the interim. But this really isn't going to be about Wofford next week. It's about the overall future of the program. VT is effectively at rock bottom again. And I feel like the wording of tearing it up to the studs has been used a lot by me and other people this week, and that's sort of a lot of the consensus. And we'll talk about a little bit about that today. If you really want to get a lot of in-depth stuff, go over to vtscoop.com, run the 60% off promo right now. Yes, 60% off right now over at vtscoop.com for all the scoops. Evan just did a really, really good wrap-up of some of the things I'm going to touch on, but in a little bit more detail and other things. So definitely check that out on the site. And jumping into that, we've had a lot of recruiting news, and we'll sort of touch on that initially because I think recruiting really is the lifeblood of college football, and that's obviously been neglected in certain ways. And even just like on such a small scale as the game on Saturday, the list for ODU, it was not compelling. So there were really no compelling visitors. They didn't come out on the site. And then just even seeing that in person, just it was so dysfunctional. There was infighting amongst the staff on what was going on with all that. And it's just honestly a picture into the window of how this department's been run. You talk about a guy who comes in as a recruiter, 45th, mid-40 ranked class, and then this year in the mid-80s for a class. And now it feels like the whole class right now is in jeopardy of falling apart. Obviously today, Thomas Wilder decommits. And it's like, well, that's sort of asinine at this point when you're trying to field a completely new team and honestly rebuilding a whole department, not just a coaching staff, which we'll touch on, but a whole department. It's a little asinine talking about high school recruits, but we'll keep that info out there. But this class is definitely in danger. A lot of guys looking elsewhere. I know a lot's been made of obviously the transfer portal opening with Brent Pry and the 30-day window. I would calm that a little bit. I think you're definitely going to see some more departures, and we'll talk about Dante Lovett today. Did enter the transfer portal. Nothing but positive things to say about Dante Lovett. Miss Chantel Lovett, obviously always out there on the practice field, battling there for backup starting cornerback reps in the year. But yeah, Virginia Tech is going to be without Dante Lovett for the remainder of the season, the first to go in the transfer portal. I know there were some reports out there. It's going to be a mass exodus, and I don't want to put the clown nose on next week, but I think it's going to be more of a slow trickle. You're definitely going to see some guys go in, but you're going to see a lot more at the end of the season because a lot of guys aren't in advantageous positions with tape, and they got to go get some time out there. So I think this window specifically, you're still going to see a lot of guys stick around, but at the end of the season, it's going to be a really, really big overhaul. So obviously Dante Lovett enters today in a secondary room that's already struggled to start the year as you look to Wofford. I know we're not going to get into too much team-specific stuff as this is a little bit more general overview. But yeah, losing Dante, decommitment of Thomas Wilder, 2 big news dockets on the day because roster construction is going to be really big for next year. And I guess jumping into that, talking about just rebuilding the whole department, hearing some reports that you wouldn't really worry too much about a lot of that because it doesn't sound too positive for a lot of people in the department for being retained. Doesn't sound too positive for coaches on the staff being retained for next year. And like I said, not going to know exactly how all this shakes out, but it sounds like people understand their coaching and working to display their jobs for these last couple of weeks. And it's sort of just putting their best tape out there for a resume for what's next. That's just some intel we've got. And like I just touched on, a lot of that ties in to recruiting and the efforts there. And also I think that will play into how they try and restructure this entire department. I think it's going to be a top-down rebuild, not just new athletic director. And I know a lot of people are hung up on Witt and the wording of that announcement, his press conference tomorrow and all this. I think they're really going to look, and like I said, a lot of this is to play out. I think there's going to be a big systematic shakeup in how they look at this. And people hear that and they're going to think about Bill Belichick and how he sort of tried to position himself and his staff like that front office in the NFL. But you look at places like Stanford and other places doing this where you're building it out in such a manner where football is obviously so different than every other sport at the collegiate level. And having people who just operate specifically for football at that high admin level is really important. And I think you're finally getting alignment on that from the board. Obviously, a lot's been made of the board and their involvement in all this. So I think you're definitely seeing some of that for sure. And like I said, that roster crisis, I think, is going to definitely slow down a little bit and not be as dramatic. Like people are saying, are they going to field a team? It's not going to be a wave coming in droves of guys. Like this team will definitely play on Saturday, and we'll see after that. Some guys, that might be their fourth game, and guys might change their minds, but it's going to be big after the season. You're going to be filling. You've seen it with UNC. You've seen it with West Virginia. When you have to bring in 70 guys, you've seen places do it effectively, like Indiana last year when you bring in a coach and you lean so heavily on the portal, late senior high school evals. Now, is this team going to shape up? Do you get everything in place? See, for me personally, before we even get into hot buzz, I'm sort of bouncing around a little bit. Are you going to be able to fill this position by mid-December? Realistically, because a lot of these names getting thrown around, there's going to be a lot of openings at that time. So this isn't something that's going to happen here in a couple weeks. I think you'll have news on some people who are going to be making these decisions and news on some people with futures in the department before that decision, before they make a head coach in place regarding some people already in the athletic department. But this isn't a decision that's going to happen here relatively soon. And when that portal window opens, you're going to hopefully try and have that head coach in place so you can try and put together a roster with late high school senior evals, maybe hold on to a couple guys and then go hit the transfer portal hard. A lot's been made of that $200 million revenue cap. I know it's going to take a lot of heat, and rightfully so, but I think it's been on the site for VT Scoop. They feel confident they're going to get that $200 million, and I think he deserves a pat on the back to sort of go out and get that. I know there's a lot of other issues going on with that, but to go out and get that funding in a time where there's maybe other forces working against you, and maybe it was a step too late, and it'll be what did him in. And ultimately, the writing's on the wall. Like he knows his days are numbered. It probably will, but it's just Virginia Tech for so long. It's always it sounds like the blame game. Like, well, if this isn't happening, it's someone else's fault. So it really just sounds like from the top down, the rector's gonna try and rip it up from the studs, and maybe contradict that a little bit if we get into some hot board topics of some old people coming back in. But that'll be a lot to shake out because it sounds like a really nice idea in theory. Are they actually going to be able to go out and clean the house? Who really knows? But I think recruiting and leaning into that specifically is going to be really big with whatever head coach you bring in. And then whether it's a general manager or you have someone running the player personnel like a general manager. And like at the NFL level, you have a cap guy. You have a CEO or CFO, more role of the business side for the football department. And then you have a guy who's just the sole GM. And if they do shape it like that, like you've seen at some other places and some places sort of getting ahead the curve, because now you can see it. If you're not getting ahead in this day and age, you're behind. And Dabo Swinney's a legend. And I was actually talking to someone I see in the chat earlier today about it's maybe a really, really good case study if you're not evolving. And you could see it with Frank Beamer at the end of his tenure. If you're not evolving and making waves on the success or trying to constantly innovate, especially in this age when it's consistently changing, you're falling behind. So I know athletic departments and things have been structured the way they have before, but I think you're going to see some big swings and changes because, like I said, you're obviously already punting on this year. And when these contracts come up, it's a pretty small window. So you're going to have to try and make a big change and hope that it sticks. So I think that'll be big. Regarding the on-field, I'm not going to touch on it too much. Just some other notes I thought was pretty prudent, maybe just from some people. I know the defense obviously been a massive point of emphasis, struggling this entire season, especially the last couple quarters when you get run out of the building. 34 and 31, 65 points allowed from that defense. Maybe Sam Seifkes, just when it's just more on him. You see the guys playing a little bit stronger, sounded like maybe had too many cooks in the kitchen with Pride trying to give his input. Now, like I said, like right now it's all asinine against Wofford, but that was just an interesting note that maybe it was just a little too much for some of those guys. You're hearing a lot of different voices, but that was just something I thought was prudent. And then I guess we'll get into the hot board buzz topic. you hear the names being thrown around, and Alex Golish. I think someone who else falls in that category that I'm thinking, John Summerall and Alex Golish. I think these are two names that are being brought up and are solid hires. And I know people hear these names and a lot's been made. I think it's going to take a really big swing if you don't get someone who's already been a head coach at that power forward level that you've seen them go through already, guys who have been at the G5 level and bringing them up as the new hot shot. And I'm not sure if they want to do that. And especially, I'm not sure if they want to go out and do a coordinator. But those are two guys that I think are going to have really heavy suitors. Obviously, Summerall with his relation to Kentucky. I know lots changed already. Like LSU was looking like it might come open. Now Florida's looking like it might come open. I think Summerall and Golish. Those are two guys who are going to be marked by them. Oklahoma State looks like it might have an opening. Who knows what's going to happen with Iowa, Oklahoma State. I just said that, Arkansas. There's just a lot of options. You still have UCLA. So I think a lot of these names that are being brought up right now, that's why it's really good. And go check out vtscoop.com for a lot more than just head coaching names, because a lot's to shake out. Now, when you look at guys, I know on vtscoop.com, it's been heavily lobbied for Dan Mullen out at UNLV, someone who's done it at Florida, at Mississippi State, who sort of understands the coaching X's and O's, has seen it from different perspectives. That's someone who makes sense. You talk about Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, checks a lot of boxes. Other people, and then I think I'll bring it up right now. Shane Beamer, Brad Crawford ran a really good article on CBSSports.com today talking about Shane. And I know there's a lot of feelings, obviously, with Shane Beamer about the program. And people are very split. That some people want him back. Some people say he'll never coach here anyway. It sounds like at South Carolina in that article that there's a little bit of pressure tying in down there. I know he's got a good thing going. Obviously, you come into the season, you have playoffs in mind. Norris Sellers looks like a Heisman guy. But if you look how that schedule shapes up, you just lost to Vanderbilt. You're about to go on the road to Missouri. And then you play Kentucky. And then look at this stretch. You're going down to Baton Rouge with LSU. You got Oklahoma at home, Alabama at home. You go to Ole Miss. You go to Texas A&M. You got a cakewalk against Coastal. And then you play Clemson. But that stretch of LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. And it sounds like there's already some pressure coming on. And the source in that article, take it for what it is, said Shane wouldn't leave South Carolina unless the fan base turns on him. And then his agent, already even just talking with some agent contacts, he's already 100% on that list and going to be contacted just for whatever it is. And I know there's so much that he'll never come back here. Well, if he's out of a job and there's pressure, you're going to entertain anything. So I think Jeff's definitely keep it in mind. Like, maybe I'm way off on this, and it just, for no matter of circumstances, he would just completely pass up on the job if it comes open. And so I think that's the only thing. Now, granted, I don't think he's going to leave South Carolina if he has a good season. They go finish 8-4 or whatever, and they turn it around. But I mean, if you play Missouri this week and Lenoris is out and things sort of start to unravel, that is a base that they want to see results. And so I wouldn't completely rule that out. I saw a lot of people poo-pooing that idea, but I think the agencies and other people will definitely give that its fair go. Some other coaching names, obviously Michael Vick's been on the headline for a lot of articles. How realistic or feasible is that? I don't know. He doesn't have the experience, coaching chops of maybe some of these other candidates, but when you talk about it, this is a guy, and I led the show even with this, and probably didn't touch on it enough. Like recruiting, you have to go recruit, and the emphasis on this. If you can get those connections back in 757 and understand the region. Brian Doan ran a really great story on vtscoop.com of all the most important things, that the recruiting budget's been cut. And now, if you can get this budget back up and actually utilize it so you can go compete on a proper playing field, it really sets you up. I think he brings that angle, but it's just a really small sample size. I wouldn't see them going that way. Some other names. Some other coordinators, Glenn Schumann at Georgia, Will Stein. I know someone brought up Baker at LSU. I'm not so positive about that. But like I said, it's so early. It's September 15th. You're 3 games into the season. This is going to extend well into November, probably into December. And then that's going to be the big turnaround of trying to field out a team through the portal rapidly. And hopefully by that time, you either have, if they go to that front office model, you have that GM in place ready to make the call, so you're not just drinking from a fire hose. And by then you have some more clarity on who's out, what those arrangements are going to look like. And I think for the record, you will have some clarity on who's out, especially coming from the top in the department. And I think probably a little bit before that, so you can get some things in motion. Now, regarding up the chain of command, that'll probably take a little bit longer. But if you can have at least that middle tier guy, like the GM or whatever it's going to be called, if they do go to that front office model, I think that'll be extremely valuable. And if you can get the head coach along from the BOV and that search committee, you're really not in a bad spot. So I know some timelines, like I touched on Saturday, are definitely not ideal. If you can get that, I think you're in a much better spot. And you can also guarantee, like I keep saying, ripping it up from the studs, you're going to be in a much, much more advantageous position moving forward. And there's going to be casualties. There's going to be really good players who walk away, but it's just going to be part of it. You know, when you make this decision and you feel like you need this aggressive of change, you're going to punt on this season and realistically probably next year, unless you have that complete, just full buy-in and situation like Indiana or a couple other teams. You look at maybe an FSU with Norvell, but even he struggled there early. So some thoughts on that. And then we'll just touch on, I know Whit Babcock has his presser tomorrow, but it definitely, the clock is ticking. It just feels like he's walking down the plane. And like he sort of understands it. You know, he tied himself to Pry. When you make that second hire, it's just known you're not going to be able to make that third. The board's now in control. A lot's been made of that on the obviously the message board, and go into vtscoop.com, go into a lot more detail on some of these more finite things. But donors and leadership, like they want to see a plan before the end of the year on this. And I think they're going to get that. And some things have already been set into motion. I think some timelines are already out there. A lot of people are making September 30th to be a big deal. I think some news and announcements will come after that. Like I said, we feel confident that the $200 million will come. Not a lot of stress there. And Whit did well to pitch that with even pressure coming from up the university chain of command, maybe delaying that for years. But now the board is aligned on that. So I think you're going to see sweeping changes. And I think you're going to see them relatively soon, not imminent, but definitely before the end of this football season, you're going to have some clarity on, I'm not exactly how it's all going to get worded because you have to be able to control the narrative still, but you're definitely going to see some changes and people are going to understand where they stand. And I think the biggest thing is just getting someone in place in that, not advisory role. I'm not exactly even sure what to call it. Let's just call it general manager for now. Like maybe even like an Andrew Luck out at Stanford, someone in that position. And floated a couple names over on the site in Evan's thread who maybe could fit that role. But if you could get someone in that role, if they do go that way, pair it with the head coach going into that portal, I think you're set up pretty well, however the AD search or whatever goes on. So a couple notes on that. So, I mean, yeah, just touching on it in the middle of a leadership reset, the coaching staff, like that's so ahead of the coaching staff. I even touched on it. Like the assistants, it sounds like they know they're coaching for their future jobs, that whoever comes in, they're going to have their pick to bring in their full staff and staff it out. So I know this wasn't much of a Wofford preview. We'll come back on Wednesday, talk about that a little bit, but this is really about whether Tech can position itself for the right coach and honestly, a much more chaotic national cycle than a year ago. There's going to be a lot more openings. When you think about the openings just a cycle ago, there were a lot more advantageous people to go be aggressive for, but it's the way it is. But now the prior is done, so the board is moving it, and the next few months will definitely define where this program goes for the next decade. I'm going to touch on some other things before we get into some comments before we wrap up. Yeah, I mean, just talking about just so it was report. I mean, I was seeing it on the sideline. It was already a weaker visitor list, and you just couldn't get alignment on basic things in the recruiting staff. And obviously, shout out to all those people. They do really great work, but there's just been a lot of change in that department specifically over years. And that comes from the top down. And I think Pry would have ultimately is going to do him in when you look back on the story. You know, that funnily, obviously everyone's made the joke that it started with ODU and ended with ODU. I think a lot that's going to do him in is those initial high coordinator hires of being inexperienced, him just being inexperienced and maybe just not having the chops in general for the head coaching job. Take nothing away from him, only had fine interactions with him. Now there's some things that'll trickle out, but only had fine interactions with him. And then also just on the back end, the staffing hires in ops, in chief of staff, in other positions. It's just, there's a lot of rubs when you bring in really, really highly touted recruits or guys and you're pitching presentations, and on the presentation, it's not them, it's another recruit. Or I know there's an anecdote out on the site from vtscoop.com that a player went on a visit and a lot of it was just them pitching a lot else about the program. Like, well, if you get into trouble, we can get you out. And like there was stuff raised about that. But I mean, some of these visits, especially on the recruiting front, being run by people where just cause a lot of headache and a lot of rubs in relationships that thought were being built, but rubbed a lot of people the wrong way and turned them off. And just staying loyal to those people. Like, loyalty is such a great trait, but obviously sometimes, yeah, it can do you in. So touching on it, recruiting, I would watch the defense this week. I don't know. We'll see with just Cephas out there. And obviously you're down Dante, probably down. We'll see how else it shakes out, monitoring a couple other names, but I wouldn't expect that monster sweeping, overwhelming clean out of the team, at least right now. Now with this offseason, a lot's going to open up, but a lot of these guys, they got to go get some film. Obviously, Lovettson. Oh, a name I didn't mention, Bob Chesney at JMU. I don't know if they'll go that route. I mean, like I said, the G5 coach, but you talk about Summerall, you talk about Golish, you talk about Chesney, they all fit that. They're all the G5 head coach, so they have head coaching chops. Now, Summerall's done it at two places. He's done it at Troy. He went to Tulane. Man, they're looking like a good football team. They're going – I forget who they take on this week, but they've got a couple quality wins. They look like they're rolling. So it's definitely going to be interesting. But right now, a lot of that's like agents are going to talk. And I mean, a lot of that hinges on who the athletic director is going to be. And I think it's pretty well known that Witt's days are numbered, and the agents understand that. They understand how the committee is going to work. So I don't think that'll be a hang up and people not even entertaining it because of the administration, because it's pretty abundantly clear on what's going to go down there. So that's just a timing thing. But yeah, we'll get in some. Oh, also, like I said, with the roster movement, like when you forfeit the year, the NIL payments, and talking to some agents and stuff, most of those contracts are structured monthly. So if you decide to redshirt or transfer, those payments are obviously voided for the rest of the year. So just a note keeping thing. And that's another big reason why a lot of guys aren't jumping in, is because you have to be maintaining consistent progress for a degree. I know it's a little shaky and weird because at UCLA, like a program like that, they technically haven't even started their school semester yet. So I'm not sure about that loophole for some of those guys, but for Tech, that's sort of where it lies. So jump into the chat and then head out of here. Would you rather have Pat Fitzgerald or John Summerall? Right now, I feel like I'm underqualified to make that call. And right now, in my heart of hearts, I don't think John Summerall would take this job with the openings or some of the other opportunities that are going to be on his plate. Pat Fitzgerald, obviously out of coaching, just won a big settlement from Northwestern, but sounds like he wants to get back into coaching. I think John Summerall is going to find himself an SEC gig. So as of right now, personally, I'd say Summerall, but I don't know if that's attainable. And like I said, we're so far out before names and however that starts shaking. Seeing people claim John Gruden. What are the odds Peterkin is still on the basketball team come winter? I would say decent odds. We're going to run an article on vtscoop.com about some of the most important pieces to keep in this class on the team. But yeah, that'll definitely be interesting. Obviously, a dual sport guy. Talked with some parents after Saturday of some players and sort of in similar situations just to gauge where people are. And there's a lot of frustration. A lot of people questioning and lost. And it's not easy on anyone, but I think overall the resolve is all right. Guys are taking it better than I think a lot of people would expect. It's been a pretty measured and patient approach. You know, when you hear that news, and we live in this cycle where you want to see all these breaking news of everyone entering the portal today, but you still have to think about it and you weigh these decisions and you make the best moves. And maybe it's just delayed and it's not immediate, but like a lot of these guys are not in an advantageous spot. Like if you do transfer, you're going to probably have to transfer down a level and try and make it back up. So it's just the way of the world. Odds of it, I would say 7 out of 10. You know, we'll just go with that. Everyone, please stop with these stupid coaching lists. Hire, point some competent people person to then come up with the list. Yeah, like I think that's really important. And I think like truly they're in the best position they have been in a long time. And I know that's really hard to see. And obviously in the short term for players and players' parents and coaches specifically, it's not ideal. But if you really want to see sweeping changes, you have to, if you want to do something you've never done before, you're going to have to do something you've never done before. And this is exactly what Virginia Tech's doing. They have shown, or at least it is very well perceived, that they're going to make changes that haven't been made in close to 30 years on some people. who have been there for a really, really long time. And it's going to start from the top down. And honestly, it could even extend into university-wide changes that could see stemming from athletics. And I think the football team is obviously so important to the history of Virginia Tech and what made it valuable. So I think they're going to really start to operate in a different echelon than just VT athletics. And yeah, I think that'll be a big thing. And I think they surely will have someone in that role, not to put an athletic director title on it, not to put a university president title on it. Obviously, like those searches go crazy and whatever shakes out at that level. But I think they're going to have someone in that role, obviously, before you even can think about a head coach. How many portal guys do you think we will have? If you're talking about departing, realistically, you're going to see a massive influx of talent leave. I would probably care to say you're going to have to bring in 60 to 70, maybe more guys in the winter portal by the time it's all said and done. That coaching staff, whoever it is, they're going to bring in their guys, and then they're going to scramble to go backfill the players they want. So that's what's so tough right now with high school guys. You're committing to the coach that just got fired, and so much is up in the air. And what's so up in the air, especially with high school recruiting, in that is your NIL revenue, like whatever you signed on, it's all in flux because of this new coach. So that's really the issue of these decommitments and where guys' heads are at, because there's so much indecision. You signed for this amount or whatever, but that's liable to change when the new staff comes in. And I think they're going to bring a lot of that in-house and make a lot more targeted decisions on that. Someone's talking about Ricky Ronnie from ODU. And he was sort of in a similar position to Pride. Like he has maybe not performed up to the level at ODU. And this was sort of maybe his prove it year. And they've started off really hot, obviously 3-0, have a good chance in the Sun Belt. Another story about the wrong name. That wasn't Pride, but it was someone really high ranking on his staff that was loyal. So, I mean, there's just, I don't know. Might have to do a Kolby's Corner story time over on vtscoop.com where I gather more of those thoughts. And a lot of those people are still employed by the university at this moment. I think everyone understands sort of what's going on over there. But for the time being, just holding, I mean, there was a lot of dysfunction in that recruiting. I mean, good people in the mix, but man, there was a lot of dysfunction specifically on the recruiting side there. Just different anecdotes, and you'll see that all over the place. But there are some things where it's just you turn your head at, and you see it in some of the results and guys you lose on, and yeah, especially in portal cycles and decisions being made on that. I think that's why it's going to be so important to get alignment, so it's not just one person making the calls and getting rubs with all the other position coaches. If you can actually get a front office model where it's okay, this is the number, this is what we have to do, and it's not just a judgment feel from someone who has no experience doing that. I think Virginia Tech football will be positioned a lot better. So I'll have to get back to you on that. Maybe run that on the Wednesday episode or trickle out some more stories. I know someone was like, I was AWOL on the site today. It's been a hectic couple of days, so just putting stuff together. But like I said, I appreciate all the support, everyone. Good synopsis right there of just some of the things going on. Make sure to check out vtscoop.com. We'll have a lot more as timelines come. But for right now, I think feel pretty confident on some changes being made here, not imminently, but relatively soon, just announcement of some of those things. For tomorrow, I'll be on site for the press conference talking to Whit Babcock and interim head coach Philip Montgomery. Be interesting to see how they format those and how that shakes out, but we'll definitely have some content over on the site from that. And then we'll jump into Wofford. We'll see how many Virginia Tech faithful show up for that. I think ODU was the lowest attended game in the prior era, and we'll see how Wofford shakes at noon. I know it's not homecoming, but military appreciation and some different things, but we'll see how that all shakes out. So appreciate it, everyone. Like I said, it's been a ton of support on this. Hopefully some nuggets in there that everyone valued, and we'll have a lot more on the site. 60% off right now on vtscoop.com. So everyone have a great rest of their evening. Have a great week. Thank you, and God bless. See you next time.